I'm taking a look now at RV Trip Wizard. Version 5 was just released in May 2017. For this video, I want to concentrate on what you do the first time you use your account. There are a few extra steps you've got to take, and I want to show those to you now. We use the Member Login button, top right of the screen. To log in, you're going to use the email address and password you selected while signing up for your RV Trip Wizard annual subscription. You enter those here, and you press Login. The main interface came up for a second, but it was overlaid by this Trip Preferences screen. The first time you log in, you do have to set these values. Trip Wizard uses these to determine various parts of your trip. For example, it needs to know the mileage of your vehicle, miles per gallon, and fuel tank capacity so that it can calculate the range of your vehicle. It'll be able to tell you when you need to stop for fuel. It also wants to know the height, so we'll say 11 feet, 6 inches. That's for getting under bridges and overpass and so forth. Now we got cost factor here. Cost per gallon for fuel, we'll say $2.60. That's not the only cost. There's also personal expenses per day in this tab. Now, why do we fill costs out? Well, Trip Wizard doesn't just give you your directions, turn-by-turn directions and stops. It tries to build an entire itinerary for you and calculate your trip's expenses so that you'll know how much the whole thing is going to cost you. So if we know that camping our trailer is going to be $35 a night, meals for the people involved, $45 a day, and $25 in miscellaneous expenses, now we've got some basis for calculating our trip's cost. There are a few other tabs here about whether you want to avoid major highways and other settings, but I'm going to stick with expenses and the RV stats for now. We're going to save these. Now the next thing we're seeing here is a demonstration. This is not a real trip, but it shows you what the screen looks like when you're building a trip and viewing a trip. This is part of the help system. It's just a presentation. There are a number of these dialog boxes that you can step through by hitting the next button. Each of these is going to describe some part of the screen, whether it's the map and the pins on it, or the trip and its stops, or the buttons in the search box at the top. This will describe all of those to you. I'm going to skip this because you can look at this anytime you want to on your own. But to get into it, it's available to you up here, Account Settings, the gear icon at the top right. We press that and it's called the Feature Tour. You can call it up whenever you want to, and it'll remind you of the various features and functions on the screen. So here we are logged into our account, and we're ready to start planning a trip. Everything you do in Trip Wizard is based on a trip. So you either have to open an existing trip. Well, this is a new account, so we have 0 trips available. So our only choice here is to create a new trip, and we'll do that. We're going to name our trip, say Test Trip, and it wants to know when we're starting, so we'll say we're leaving this coming Saturday. Create the trip. Okay. Every trip has to start at the beginning, so you can use this Use My Location button. Most phones, browsers, on computers, tablets have something called Geolocation. This tries to tap into that, and in many cases it produces an address close to where you are. Sometimes it's very accurate, sometimes it's the city somewhere nearby. I'm going to use just a city location, say Hartford, Connecticut. Okay, here it is. And I'm going to say we're going to start here. Alright, now I've created a trip. On the left we see Test Trip. We see that it has a starting location, and at the center I've got a map with a lot of pins on it. If I go in here, when I put my mouse over Hartford, notice the Hartford icon is moving up and down. That is a useful feature. As you add a lot of stops to a trip, you've got the background pins and buttons available. Whenever you mouse over one of the stops on your trip, it'll bounce so that you can find it easier. Now, let's take a look at some of these pins here. The ones that are green that look like an arrow pointing up, these are parks in the RV Trip Wizard database. Now, this is important to know because these parks have extra information available to you if you use these. Let me click on one of these. Okay. You see you've got the name of the park, you've got its address, website link, phone number, list of available reviews, general information, overall rating based on all the reviews, and the ability to add the park to your trip. If you use a park that's in the TripWizard database, you have access to all this extra information. If you call up the same location just as a point of interest from, say, Google Maps, then you get its location and maybe a piece of information, but calling up a park from the TripWizard database will give you this extra information. I'm going to cancel out of that. I'm going to make a very simple trip here, just one location, so I'm going to use the search box at the top of the screen. I'm starting in Hartford, so I'll go out to Cape Cod. I know there's a place called Nickerson State Park. Well, there it is. All right, and here's what I was describing. What you type in the search box comes up in search results. The TripWizard database parks are always on top, and then general points of interest are available below that. Well, this is the same Nickerson State Park in point of interest here as is the park in the park database. If we choose this one, we get the point on the map, but we don't get all of the database elements from RV TripWizard. So I'm going to add that as a park instead. Okay, it's positioned my map to that location, a nice big icon for Nickerson State Park in Brewster, Massachusetts. More park details, calls up that same screen again, verify that it's the actual place I want to stay, and now I can add it to my trip using the boxes over here. Let's say I'm going to stay there for 5 nights. Well, as soon as I typed in 5, I've got a cost factor here. That is the total for camping my vehicle there. It takes that value out of trip preferences and multiplies it by the nights. I'm going to add this to the trip, and it's drawn a map line for me, and over here on the side I now have a trip with 2 stops. I've got a starting location, and bouncing on the other side of the screen is Nickerson State Park. As I said, this is going to be a simple trip. One of the features of this is you can return to the starting point from wherever you are on your trip. If you're 10 stops out and you want to go back home, you click that, and your location of your starting location is back on here again, with the cost in fuel to get there. I didn't add any nights for that. I just said get me home, and now I've got the cost of the fuel to get back. If I show the entire trip, and I get rid of the sidebar, I see my trip on the map. It's a simple one, but it's there. It's starting location, the roads I'm going to take, and the destination. Bring the sidebar back out, and that's all there is to it. We've created a trip. We've told it how long we're going to stay somewhere. It's calculated all the total costs, the camping cost, the miscellaneous cost, the meal cost, fuel to get home, and down at the bottom we've got our total. 362 miles, 5 days, $605. And that's our trip. Now, one of the things you may be asking is, well, I've got my trip. Now, how do I save it? I don't want to lose this. Well, you don't have to. There's no save button on the screen. Every time you add a stop, edit a stop, anything that you do that is an update, it gets saved at that moment. So you can just go and hit the X on the browser, and the browser will close and your trip is saved at that point in time. And that's basically what I'm going to do now, is just close this out. I've got my trip. And that's it.